Hello, and welcome to MIT Sloan Alumni Online. Every month, MIT Sloan Alumni Online brings you the latest breaking news, cutting-edge research, groundbreaking ideas, and school updates from MIT Sloan faculty and alumni. Today, we're pleased to have Dave Robertson joining us to discuss Innovating Around the Box, the Power of Little Ideas. Dave Robertson is a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management, where he teaches product development and digital product management. Prior to MIT, Professor Robertson held faculty positions at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and at IMD in Lausanne, Switzerland. He has also held several executive management positions in enterprise software companies and spent 5 years at McKinsey & Company in the U.S. and Sweden. Professor Robertson is the author or co-author of several books, the most recent being The Power of Little Ideas, a low-risk, high-reward approach to innovation. He has published articles or had his research featured in Wired, Forbes, Fast Company, Harvard Business Review, Strategy and Business, Sloan Management Review, the Financial Times, and many other business journals. Dave holds a PhD and MBA from the MIT Sloan School of Management and a BS from the University of Illinois. Professor Robertson, it's great to have you with us today, and I will now turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kathy. So I want to talk about the book I published last year, The Power of Little Ideas, but really to put it in context. This isn't going to be a review of that book, but rather just talking about innovation more generally. That what do you have to do as managers to innovate? And in particular, I want to talk about a particular period of innovation, type of innovation, a reason for innovation. That, what I'm showing on the screen now, I think is one of the older concepts in business academia, which is the business life cycle. And too often what I see in the literature is a focus on innovation at either end, right? That, we hear stories about Steve Jobs and Elon Musk and other amazing people that do incredible things and start new markets or disrupt existing ones. And we hear about, these amazing startups. We also hear about things at the other end. We hear about Steve Jobs 2.0 when he comes back to Apple in 1997 and really turns that company around. And we also hear stories of, people like on the right here, you see Jürgen V. Knutstorp, who turned around Apple. And I've also got a picture there of Mark Begor, who just took over at Equifax. And who knows where that's going to go, but it's going to take some innovation to turn things around there. And so we hear these stories of companies that are either the disruptors or the disruptees, and they tend to be at either end. I'm interested in what happens in the middle. I'm interested in what happens with existing products and existing markets and how you innovate there, because I'm convinced that most people in most companies doing most innovation is happening in this phase. That most of you listening probably are in companies where you have existing products, and in some cases those products are, they're getting mature, they're getting commoditized, the growth is slowing, and you've got to decide how to innovate. And I think that the academic literature and the popular literature especially has been a little too focused on those big disruptive types of innovation when there's other options available. And I wrote a book a couple years ago, as Kathy was kind enough to mention, about a company that hit exactly this choice back in the late 90s. That Lego had gone through a period of 15 years of 14% annual growth. They double in size every 5 years for 15 years between 78 and 93. And then that cycle ran out, as everything does, right? I mean, there's nothing lasts forever. And things went flat. And they got caught up in this new idea, which was just coming out in the late 90s, of disruption. That, there were these disruptive technologies, disruptive business models. And if you didn't disrupt yourself, somebody else would. And they became convinced by this logic that, since the brick wasn't working anymore, that they were being left behind and that they had to reinvent the future of play. And they tried, and it almost bankrupted them. They almost went out of business in 2003 and 2004 because they fell into this trap. But they learned something from that, and from that brush with bankruptcy, and came back stronger than ever, to the point where I thought it was worth writing a book about them, and it just kept going. And so I wrote another book that came out last May, and that book was how would you do what Lego did in your company, and used examples from companies that weren't Lego, from financial services companies, from pharmaceutical companies, from services businesses, from industrial companies, and just tried to do as many different examples of this approach to innovation as I could, and to show the step-by-step process for how to do it. And just to give you a kind of a short overview, I think that what the trap Lego fell into is this kind of binary view of innovation. That there's two types. There's the incremental improvement of current products for current customers, and I should say I think that's a tremendously important type of innovation. And then there's this kind of disruptive, radical, revolutionary innovation where you reinvent your market or go into new markets or whatever. And, that as the alternative is what Lego pursued, and of course it almost bankrupted them. But there's a third way, and that I think of as innovation around the box. It's respecting your current products for your current customers, but asking how can you innovate around those products? What complementary innovations can you do that will make those products more compelling, more useful, more valuable to their customers? And so it's not leaving your market behind. It's not leaving your product behind, but rather it's reinforcing and adding things to the product that will make it more useful and remove frustrations that may be there. And so what I want to do today is focus on what is this third way that's neither incremental nor radical. I don't want to spend much time on that, but I do think it's necessary to explain it. And then talk about what are the other tools that you as managers need to know. How does this compare? And talk a little bit about what kind of toolkit do you need. There's no such thing as one best way to innovate. Rather, you as leaders in your companies need to know and have in your back pocket not just a hammer, but a screwdriver, a wrench, and so forth. And so what are the most important ones? I've done a little research that I want to share with you today. So let's quickly go through what is this third way to innovate. And for Lego, it was very much. Let me jump back here. When Lego fell almost to bankruptcy in 2003 and 2004, what they discovered was that they'd gotten wrong one critical thing, which is that when they went away from the brick, that customers had no reason to do business with Lego. When they tried to reinvent the future of play by, creating these new play experiences, if they didn't have a brick, people didn't really want to buy it from Lego. When they went back to the brick, but surrounded the brick with complementary innovations, that's when people returned to the brand, and that's when we as customers realized that this was something that Lego could do well. And so the question, if you're trying to do this in your company, the question you would start by asking is, where are you not going to innovate? What is your brick? And you may have many different bricks. And my advice to companies is always start small. Choose one narrow product in one specific market, and just think, what did we do? What's stable here? What did we do yesterday? What are we going to do today? What are we going to do tomorrow? And then think about the next bigger question, which is, what are customers trying to do with our product? I think of this as the business promise, that I deliberately don't use the word brand because I think brand is bigger, that business promise is tighter and more focused on, what are people trying to do with the product? For Lego, it was about bringing bricks to life through rich stories. And the example I've got here is that they're one of their biggest hits from the past decade, a toy called Ninjago. And what made it special, the third step is, what can you do to innovate around your core product? And for this toy Ninjago, they started a cartoon show. They had a little game in it called Spin Jitsu, where two kids could play with the spinning game against each other, and one of them would pop off before the other. The minifigure in the middle of the spinner would pop off before the other. And that, coupled with a very rich story, made this whole toy irresistible. And of course, bringing all that to market can be very difficult. You'll notice that I draw this fourth step differently because you need to plan for that. And this could be a podcast or webcast in itself. That you need to plan for that right from the start, because there's some things you need to do with roles and structure and metrics and business cases that if you don't set it up right, you doom your team to failure. I'll talk a little bit about that today, but not much. And we saw this all come together with Lego Batman. That last year, Lego Batman, of course, they were trying to innovate around that Batman character that had been established a couple years before. And so there was a dozen toys in the store when the Batman movie came out, but there's also comic books and video games, and Lego Batman has his own Instagram channel. He has his own Facebook page. He has his own Snapchat lens. There's a little Easter egg. If you have an iPhone, I don't know if you saw the movie, but in the movie, Lego Batman has an iPhone. If you talk to your iPhone like Lego Batman talked to his, if you say, "Hey, computer," to your iPhone, it'll talk to you like your Lego Batman in your iPhone. All right? So Apple paid a little fee. It got the product placement in the movie, and of course, it put that little Easter egg into every iPhone in the world. It works in many different languages, by the way. And so, there's also events at the Lego stores. There's Happy Meal toys. There's merchandise. There's web apps. There's books. And all those things made that Lego Batman character very successful. And so it was very much, deciding what the toy was, but innovating around the toy to bring it all to market. And as an illustration of this fourth step and the challenges, I would urge you to think about, why does Lego Batman, why is that movie coming to theaters in February? If it's primarily a kid's movie, why doesn't it come out at Christmas? Well, think about it. So, think about the discussion between Lego and Warner Brothers, who made the movie. Warner Brothers people, I know, wanted to bring that movie out at Christmas time because that's when it would have done better. But Lego doesn't need help selling boxes of bricks at Christmas. And so they have a very tough discussion to say, no, the movie is going to come out in February, because we are thinking about the profits overall from all these different innovations together. And so that's not an easy thing for many companies to do. We're taught, that we should have very tight P&Ls and maximize profits. But when you're doing this approach to innovation, sometimes optimizing the individual innovations will sub-optimize the overall portfolio. Anyhow, that's a conversation in itself. But when I did my second book, the book that came out a year ago, it's actually my third book, I found a number of different companies that practice this approach to innovation. And so the best metaphor, and then we'll move on to the next topic, the best metaphor I've heard for this approach to innovation is that it's innovation as dating, not fighting. That a lot of innovation is really about, the metaphors are used are about fighting the competition, trying to understand what they do, come out with something better, faster, cheaper than them, bring that to market, and you go back and forth, and of course that makes everybody in the market miserable. The approach that Lego learned was not about fighting the competition, but it was about dating the customer. And I love this metaphor, that if you think about innovation as dating your customer, think when you met that special person in your life and you wanted more of a relationship with them. Well, you got to know who they were, what they cared about, what their hopes and dreams and passions and fears were. And then you tried to understand how you could connect to them in more different ways, how you could become a bigger part of their life. Well, that's the way we should think about innovation. And what that means is often that one innovation isn't enough, that we need to be thinking about how we innovate around our product to make it more useful and valuable and compelling for our customers. Now, how is this different than other types of innovation? And now I'm going to get a little academic on you, but I'll try and illustrate it with some fun stories. Then let me start with Bart. So I'm going to go from bats to rats, from Batman to Ratman. Bart Wegens was a Belgian Zen Buddhist priest who was trained as a product engineer and also was an animal lover. And what he did is he went down to Africa and tried to find a problem that he could really help with. And what he found was the landmine problem, that around 60 countries around the world are still affected by landmines. I didn't know this until I did some background research, but we're still adding more landmines than we're removing, despite all the efforts to slow this down. And of course, landmines are very cheap and easy to plant, but very expensive and slow to get rid of. And so people, young and old, step into minefields and suffer just horrific damages, if not death. Well, what he did is, and I guess, we won't play the video, but you can check apopo.org, apopo.org, and see some of this. But he trained rats to sniff out landmines. And the benefits that rats have over dogs is that they don't weigh very much. Where a dog might set off a landmine, a rat doesn't. And so they train these rats to sniff out landmines. And it turns out rats' senses of smell are almost as good as dogs. And so they created this whole system, not just of training rats, but also training rat handlers. And then also training the trainers. How do you set up a whole training program for the rats, and how do you set up a training program for the rat handlers? Because they took this from one country in Africa to many different countries in Southeast Asia and of course other African countries, and they're exporting their trained rats from Tanzania to many different countries. Now here's a framework for thinking about types of innovation. And I want you to think about, where would you put Bart and his trained rats, his hero rats they're called, in this framework. And this is one of the oldest. It's a 60-year-old framework, but it's a really valuable one. And people tend to reinvent it without proper attribution. It was actually a Harvard Business Review article back from 1957. So a horizontal dimension is the technology, the method, the process, the solution, and is it something that you and your company use now? Well, that would be over on the left side. Is it something that maybe somebody else is using, where you could hire a supplier or hire a consultant and learn about it? Has it been proven out by somebody? And over in the red on the right, is it new disruptive technology, new to the world? And are there risks to applying it? On the vertical dimension is the market, the needs that the innovation is satisfying. Is this an existing market that you are serving, that you understand well? Well, that would be in the bottom part of the matrix. Is this a market that somebody else is serving but you're not? Well, that would be in the middle. And then the red up at the top is this some new market that nobody is serving? So where would you put Bart and his rats? The answer is really they're a disruptive technology, which is this right region. They're a new solution to an old problem. And think of if you were making mine detectors and low-cost mine detectors for third world countries. And by the way, I didn't say these rats are really good at it. I mean, they're better than the affordable technology for mine detection in these developing countries. So he and his team developed this ability for rats to sniff out landmines. And then, of course, they kind of innovate around the rats. They create a training program for the rats. They create a training program for the rat handlers. And they end up exporting that to other countries in Southeast Asia and around the world. So, so that's really a disruptive innovation. Too often we hear the story of Kodak or Nucor in the steel mill business and how mini mills disrupted the big incumbents like U.S. Steel. And we hear a lot of the same stories, but, disruptive innovation is real. That no amount of improving the film camera was going to let Kodak survive the digital revolution in photography. And so there really are really important examples of disruption happening in many different industries. But the most common type of innovation is just traditional product development. That's where you're taking your existing products for existing customers and making them better. Blue ocean strategy is something that you hear quite a lot of, especially in Europe. It comes out of INSEAD, a business school in France. And the metaphor is that blue oceans are blue because it's clear sailing, as a contrasted to red oceans, which have blood in the water because the sharks are circling. The competition is so fierce. It's like a red ocean with tons of carnivorous competitors attacking each other and attacking anything that swims in it. But if you can find some unmet need, some latent need that nobody has satisfied before, then you can sail on blue ocean, and profits and growth are going to be much better. The other type of kind of revolutionary and disruptive innovation would be the lean startup. And if you read the books about this, it's really, we don't really understand the technology and what it's good for. We don't understand which market it's going to be good for and how those things are going to come together. But we do lots of experiments. We pivot. We find something that works and is scalable, and we go forward from there. Now, these, I think I bring all these together, the blue ocean, the lean startup, the disruptive innovation. They're really different approaches and different philosophies, but I think of all these as, disruptive or revolutionary or radical innovations. Anything in the red, of course, is different than the green, that you can, and this whole binary view of things, that either we do the green or the other types, blue ocean, the lean startup, and the disruptive. That's the trap that Lego fell in. But what they found is that there was this third way of developing a portfolio of complementary innovations around your product that helped them revive their product that had really become commoditized. And so let me talk a little bit about this, because it's important in terms of what I see the best companies doing. I can make this slide available. I think this is my favorite dozen books about innovation that I think every leader should read. And there's lots of places you can go to learn more about these different approaches. But we talked about a disruptive innovation, Bart and his hero rats, and how it went to other types of markets. For sustaining innovation, this is just developing a better version of a better product. My favorite example that I use in classes is CNA Global. These three guys in the upper right are the founders of CNA Global, and all they do is they go to Amazon and they find products with lots of negative feedback. Lots of feedback means lots of people bought the product, and negative feedback means they didn't like what they bought. CNA Global goes in, redesigns the product. They started with a shower radio. They found a lot of people bought a shower radio, found that it wasn't very waterproof, hated it, and so they made a radio you could hang in your shower that was genuinely waterproof. And then they got good at waterproofing things. So I show on the matrix there how they took that waterproofing technology, if you will, and made pool speakers. They made emergency radios. They made all kinds of things. And it's been very successful for them. All they do is they find a product that isn't very good, and they make it good. And they bring it to market, and they've built a 9-figure business. It's privately held, so that's the only information he would give me. But it's a 9-figure business in the hundreds of millions. Blue ocean, literally, GoPro was a blue ocean product in that it was started by a surfer, the guy in the lower right, Nick Woodman, who wanted to capture his greatest adventures. And so it was a camera, but it was a camera that was waterproof and rugged, and that you could strap on your surfboard or mountain bike, or you could, jump out of an airplane with. But it didn't stay a blue ocean for long, right? I mean, soon it becomes something that they just have to develop around that product. That something that starts as new or disruptive or revolutionary, of course, migrates over time to the lower left. But the way they migrated there, I think, was very important. That what they did was they became, I think, a great example of this Lego approach to innovation. That what GoPro offered was not just a camera, but they have a really wonderful set of mounts. You can mount your GoPro on anything. And there's even a dog mount. I love that. You can put it on your dog to see what his or her day is like. They have a smartphone app to let you control your GoPro. They have software to take the raw footage and turn it into a music video. They have a great website, and they'll pay you money for a great video. And my favorite little gadget is they even have a wrench that doubles as a bottle opener that lets you tighten the bolts when you're bolting your GoPro onto your surfboard or dog or whatever. So not only does it help you prepare for your greatest adventure, but it helps you, since it's the bottle opener, celebrate afterward. And they had 5 years of 90% annual growth, sales growth. So they had a great, and of course that's slowed down since then, but that's a pretty good run. 5 years at 90%. I think many of you would happily trade for that. But what I want to talk about is how this third way really requires a third dimension to this matrix, and it is this view that it isn't really taking GoPro into a new market, and it isn't substituting new technology or methods or processes, but rather it's just taking that product and surrounding it with complementary innovations, mounts, desktop software, smartphone app, social media site, et cetera, that increases the value of that camera. And one other part of this GoPro story that I think is interesting is that Sony realized that this was becoming a major market. And so Sony challenged its team in Tokyo, I imagine, to come up with a better, rugged, waterproof action camera. And they did. It had image stabilization, it had GPS, it had noise reduction, et cetera. It was a third cheaper than GoPro. Who do you think won in the market, right? Because it wasn't one camera against another. It was one camera against a portfolio of innovations. And so Sony got 1/7 of the market share of GoPro. And in fact, really, GoPro sells more video cameras, 50% more video cameras than Sony. And so that's a great example of how fighting the competition versus dating the customer, right? Sony was fighting the competition, was fighting GoPro, and they lost. GoPro was dating the customer. For the lean startup, I love this example of the self-driving spoon. There was a graduate student in robotics at University of Michigan who wanted to explore sensors and force feedback and robotics technology to help people with severe hand tremors. Some people with severe hand tremors will have trouble eating. The food will go all over the place. And so it's a spoon that will cancel out those hand tremors. And even if the handle, the bottom part of the spoon, wiggles around a lot, the part that holds the food will stay stable. So it took a while for them to perfect that, but once they did, of course, they had to figure out what kind of market. There's different people with different types of hand tremors and different types of disabilities, but they finally figured out how to do it. And then, of course, they had to innovate around the spoon. So think about recharging, and think about somebody with a severe hand tremor trying to plug a USB cable in to recharge that spoon. Well, they came up with an inductive charger with a very, the bottom of the spoon has a big, broad, rounded base, and all you have to do is fit that in its cup, and that will recharge the spoon. So they innovated around the spoon, and of course brought that to market. They, by the way, got bought by the part of Google, Waymo, I guess I should say the part of Alphabet, that does self-driving cars. So the self-driving spoon is now part of the business of Waymo that does self-driving cars. And so I tell you all these stories to bring up a common theme, which is that no successful company does one type of innovation, that often you cycle through these different types of innovation, and that you may start out as a disruptor, but then maybe you'll innovate around that product to really make it more valuable. And then maybe you'll look for new markets, or maybe you'll start out as a blue ocean where you're not doing any real new technology, right? GoPro didn't really have any new technology, but it innovated around that in a very Lego-like way to make that product much more valuable, and held off a furious assault from Sony. And so, companies may start in one area and then continue on in another. So you as managers need to know these different types of innovation, and you need to practice them. And the type of innovation I focus on, this kind of third way approach, this innovating around the box, I use those two things interchangeably, is just one of many. And I think it's an important one that hasn't been talked about a lot, and that's why I wrote a book, but it's just one of many. And so I did a research study to try and understand where it ranks. because I was starting, as you can imagine, I'd written a book about it. I was starting to see it everywhere. And so I did two things. First, for many years, I assigned to my MBAs as part of my innovation class that they had to choose two companies in the same market, one of which had successfully out-innovated the other, and documented which innovations led to the winner's success. The first thing I noticed was that by far, most of the papers were disruptive examples, but by far, most of the stories were repeats that we as business school professors love telling stories about Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Google, Uber, Tesla, et cetera, Airbnb, you know the group of companies. And once you took that out, the truly disruptive examples were few and far between. That this was a wildly unrepresentative sample, and it was far more representative of the stories that you hear in the popular press and in business school classes about those disruptive successes, those big industry-changing examples. Once we took out the duplicates, we still had over 100 different examples. And really, I came in third, which is great, right? I mean, I'm happy to be on the podium, but the most important type of innovation is just taking your current product and making it better. Lots of great examples like this. Ford 150, the Ford F-150 pickup truck, has consistently beaten the Chevy Silverado because it's a better product. Gillette was second in the market with razors for women to Bic, but they just made a better product and they own the market because of it. Trek and bicycles, C&A Global, the people that go to Amazon. And that is the most common reason why one company out-innovates another, is that they're just better at developing products. The second most common is blue ocean innovation. So, going and finding some unmet need and satisfying that need and satisfying it in a good way. That's where GoPro started, from 2007 to 2010. After 2010, then it really started innovating around it in a more third way, Lego-y way. But there's lots of other examples, Southwest and airlines, et cetera. The lean startup, there's not that many examples of this. And really disruptive innovation like Kodak or Nucor. Not that, you tend to hear the same stories again and again. The type that I have been studying and writing about, it matters. I mean, it's out there. There's lots of different examples. I list, over a dozen at least in my book. And then there's a number of examples where, the way people attacked a blue ocean type of market was through a third way type of innovation, or they went in with some disruptive new technology but innovated around it. And so it's hard to say that it's one or another. And so I put that in a final category of hard to determine, that last 16%. Excuse me. And so the lesson here is that, when you have some existing product, and it's an existing market, that we shouldn't be too quick to jump away from it and explore disruptive new innovations, new technologies, because that's difficult, that's prone to failure, often very expensive and risky. Instead, take a look and see whether it's possible that you can't innovate around that product and get some more value from it. Lego, everybody within Lego thought that product was dead. And they had 8 years of 24% annual growth left in that product. And so, if you are down in the lower left of this matrix, by all means, watch and see what's out there. Are there new technologies that might, change your market? Keep an eye out. But I wouldn't, this happens very rarely, and it's often better to let venture capitalists invest in it and let small companies fail and watch and see. And finally, that 10th company that does succeed, well, partner with them, acquire them, or, otherwise, acquire the technology from somebody who's proven it out. Having a little group off to the side watching for this is by all means necessary, because it does happen. And similarly, you should always be looking to see if there's some way that you could take your existing products into new markets. But what I'm arguing is that too often we jump away from our existing customers with our existing products, and that innovating around those can be incredibly valuable and can open up new opportunities for growth. I want to talk just about two last quick stories. One is the spin pop. So this was invented by two West Virginia postmen. And it's a little electric motor that spins the lollipop around that automates the process of licking the lollipop. Only in the U.S. could we come up with this, right? that you don't have to spend so much time and effort licking the lollipop. So this gets brought to market, and it does fine. And over time they perfect that ability to manufacture things with little motors and little buttons and so forth. They patent the Try Me button. But then the group goes off and develops another cheap, really low-cost product with a little electric motor in it. The spin brush came directly from the same people that did the spin pop. And what was unique about the spin brush was not that it was the first electric toothbrush. There's many on the market, but they tended to cost in the $60, $70, $80 or more dollar range. Whereas the spin brush was brought to market for $4.99, less than a tenth of the cost of the other electric toothbrushes. And it didn't work anywhere near as well, but of course it was better than just a manual toothbrush. So, that's an example of a company that took its capabilities of making things, very low-cost devices with little electric motors and bringing them to a new market. I think the blue ocean people would consider this a blue ocean. I don't really. I mean, I think the blue ocean people think everything is blue ocean. Every innovation is blue ocean, and I think they draw the boundaries too large. But that's an academic quibble. But this is brought to market, and of course, the use of the spin pop creates a need for the spin brush. So there's that kind of synergy there. But what happens next is the reason I'm telling the story. So they patent the Try Me button. They patent the combination of fixed and moving bristles. They end up selling those patents to Procter & Gamble for $480 million US. Procter & Gamble makes it part of the Crest family. At its peak, it sold over 100 million units per year. But the reason why Crest bought it was that it helped to Procter & Gamble to innovate around the toothpaste, right? That the toothpaste was becoming kind of a commodity. And they were able to change Crest from a toothpaste brand to an oral care brand by innovating around it. Not just with toothbrushes, but also with mouthwash, with white strips, with floss, with other things. And so by innovating around the toothpaste, they were able to expand the brand and increase the sales of the toothpaste. So the lesson of this story is that you don't even need to innovate around your own product. There's a British company of luxury goods called Dunhill. Dunhill actually was started to innovate around the motor car. They made things that went along with a motor car that other companies made. And so you can innovate around somebody else's product. Logitech has been very successful about innovating around the PC, even though they don't make PCs. So I will offer you a tool for free. This is a tool in beta, so no promises about effectiveness. But if you want to try this, think of a specific innovation challenge that you're facing in your company. Some competitors just released a very good alternative to one of your products, or your product is becoming mature or challenged by competition, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I'm working on this idea of a game called Cards Against Innovation. Now, those of you who have played Cards Against Humanity know that this is not a family game. Cards Against Humanity is not. Cards Against Innovation is a family game. It doesn't have some of those, for those of you who know the game, cards that you wouldn't want to use with your kids, for example. So what you do is there's some black cards and white cards, and there's in the deck of cards there's a card that has all these instructions. But you split it up, and one person who has an innovation challenge becomes a judge. That person takes all the black cards. The other people divide up the white cards. The judge chooses a black card and then explains the innovation challenge. And the other players who have the white cards put down the best 2 to 4 cards that will help the judge solve their innovation challenge. And so it's using the same creativity process that works so well in the Cards Against Humanity game. And by the way, if you've ever played Apples to Apples, it's the same gameplay. And so if you'd like to try this, just send me a self-addressed stamped envelope with $3.75 of postage. Unfortunately, I can only do this in the U.S. Send it to my home address, which is right here, and I'll ask Kathy to include this also in the follow-up email. And then get together with your team, try the game. I'm giving away the decks here because I want to kind of prove this out. But the game is designed to help you think of ways to innovate around your current product. And so try it. Let me know. Email me your feedback. If you have ideas for other cards, by all means tell me. And hopefully I'm pretty sure it will give you ideas for ways to innovate around your current product. So this is free to MIT alumni. And again, all you have to do is send me an envelope with postage. I'll close with a story of Bart, and where Bart, of course, the Zen Buddhist priest who's a rat trainer. We all know one of those, right? Well, after Bart innovated around the rat with a training program for the rats, a training program for the rat wranglers, and a whole protocol for handling the rats in conflict zones and to remove unexploded ordnance. Well, after that, he took that technology into not just new geographic markets, but an entirely new market. Well, what he found was that, in fact, he could use these same rats to detect tuberculosis. That when tuberculosis kills many more people in third world countries than landmines or other unexploded ordnance do. And furthermore, when you have tuberculosis early on, it changes the smell of the sputum, the stuff you cough up, in a very pronounced way. And you can train these rats to sniff out that smell. And by doing so, there's two types of tuberculosis tests. One is a skin prick test, which is very cheap and affordable, and was the test that was being used in some of these third world countries, but it's not very reliable. There's a blood test that we would use here in the U.S. and in developed Western countries that is often not affordable. Well, you can train rats to detect this smell, and that plus the skin prick test can be just as reliable as the blood test that we use here in our country. So they've taken this idea of the technology of trained rats and brought it to a new market in a very blue ocean-y way. And so this is very much an example of how sometimes by innovating around your core product, you can find new opportunities that you wouldn't have found any other way. So sometimes the way to get big new ideas is by looking closer to home, by looking at for these complementary innovations and seeing where they lead you. So we are doing a course on this approach to innovation. If you'd like to learn this third way to innovate, then by all means register for this course. I don't think it's up there yet, but if we'll send a link that you can watch for. It's going to be held on October 25th and 26th. MIT alumni, of course, get a 20% discount on executive education courses. And we're going to spend 2 days just going through this approach to innovation. So with that, I know I'm a little over our time, Kathy, but thanks very much for your attention. And now I think we have time for some questions.
That's right. Thank you so much, Dave. This was terrific. As a reminder to our participants, please type in your questions in the Q&A box on the right side of the screen. Take a moment to make sure that you've selected all panelists before submitting your questions. And while you're doing that, I'd like to take a moment to tell you about MIT Sloan Alumni Online events. On Saturday, June 9th, Roberto Rigobon will join us live from Reunion Weekend 2018. He'll discuss his work on Promise, a new economic framework for understanding sustainability. We're thrilled to provide this opportunity to our alumni who may not be able to join us at Reunion this year. Additionally, on Thursday, June 14th at 6 p.m., Bryn Penne Burkhart will join us for our third Career Series event on compensation conversations. To register, visit the MIT Sloan Alumni Online website, where you'll see links to previously recorded sessions as well. And now let's move on to questions. We'd like to start today's Q&A with some spotlight questions that were submitted during registration. Our first question comes from Atad Peled, MBA 2017 in San Francisco, California, and he asks, I've heard that by mentioning, quote, the box term, you're actually creating the box and therefore limiting creativity again. How should we, as managers, go about accelerating innovation and creativity without actually limiting it?
Yeah, I think I've got a response to this that may surprise you. I think that the way to accelerate innovation is by limiting it. That sometimes the way you get more innovation is by putting boundaries around it. I'll go back to Lego. So Lego, one of the problems that they had when they almost went bankrupt is when they challenged the people to come up with, new play experiences, to reinvent the future of play. Is they came up with a lot of things that weren't very good, weren't appropriate for the brand, weren't, they were often very flawed, and they got themselves into businesses they didn't understand and spent a lot of money on areas that really didn't pan out. When they went back to the brick and put more constraints around their innovation teams and said, we don't want you to reinvent the future of play. We want you to create a great, fire station or a police car or something like that. And by the way, we want it by Christmas time, and we want it to be profitable. That's where they went to in 2004. And then over time, they broadened that box, and now it's, for Lego Batman, it's how can we create a really vivid character and adventure for that character, and how can we create toys that let kids play out the drama that was in the movie, and how can we create video games that will let them wander around the world of their hero, because all those things will increase sales of the brick. They'll not disrupt it. And so I think it's our job as innovation leaders to put boxes around innovation. And there is a very important balance that you want to give your people, the direction that they need to deliver. That you don't want to move away from your brand. You don't want to move away from profitability. You don't want to move away from, ethical retailing practices. But on the other hand, while you want to give them direction, to deliver, you also want to give them the space to be creative. And so, too often we do too small a box. And what I argue for in the approach to innovation that I'm talking about, this third way approach, this innovating around the box, is that we do too tight a box, that the box is tremendously important, but it should be broadened to include not just the innovation, but the broader promise and the freedom to deliver on that promise through partnering with external companies, through coming up with, say, new pricing plans, new complementary products, new services, et cetera, and all those things together delivering on a single promise to help the customers, to help us satisfy the needs of our customers more broadly.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Our next question comes from Patricia Nwobodo, SF09 in Abuja, Nigeria. And she asks, how should banks engage their regulators to see the wisdom in disrupting their business?
Yeah, that's a great question, a hard one. And I think that the regulator question is often a sustaining innovation question. And so let me explain what I mean. That let's just take a basic bank, savings, current accounts. In the U.S., we call them checking accounts, loans, things like that. Those are regulated products, and those can be difficult to innovate because they are regulated and because, of course, of our systems that have embedded our processes in technology that can be very expensive to change. But when you innovate around the product, then you often are freed from that regulatory burden. I'll give you an example that I love from financial services, although it's insurance, not banking. one of the best banking and insurance companies in the U.S. is USAA. Anybody in the U.S. knows about this company. It serves only military veterans and their families, or active military members. And one of the things that they did to innovate around their insurance product, they do typical property and casualty insurance. What they found was that when there is some kind of disaster, a flood or a tornado or hurricane, something like that, that they had trouble getting in to verify that a house or a car or a boat or whatever was damaged so that they could pay the claim. So to innovate around their product, one of the things that they did is they were the first company to get a commercial exception for the drone to fly commercial drones. So they, before Amazon, before anybody else, could fly drones, and the reason they wanted that is they wanted to be able to fly drones over disaster areas instead of having to drive in through car. And they found that if they could verify that, in fact, some damage had been done, a house was totaled, the car was gone, they could get a check in somebody's hands, a day, 2 days before any other insurance company. And that person would be first in line with the builders, and so could be back in their house months before. But a couple of hours difference in settling a claim could result in a couple months difference in rebuilding a house. And so they actually innovated around the insurance product with this different way of evaluating claims. And by doing so, they did hit a very different regulator. It was the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. They had to get that regulation. They had to go through that regulatory hurdle. But by doing so, they made their financial services product much better.
Great. And now we have some live questions coming in. So one person is asking, we've heard about incrementalism, continuous innovation, et cetera. Is the topic old wine in a new bottle, however, with fresher, more on point, more recent examples, or a paradigm shift that's likely to impact how business is conducted in new ways and looking ahead?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So incremental innovation, as I said, I think is the most important type of innovation. I define that as taking your current product for your current customers and making it better every week, every month, every year. That's the most important type of innovation. That's what my research showed. That's what I believe. I think that's what most people doing most innovation in most companies are doing, that type of innovation. And so the type of innovation I'm talking about is different than that. It is coming up with new complementary innovations around your current product. And yes, people have been talking about this for a while. So is the book I wrote last year old wine in new bottles? Yes and no. I mean, I think some aspects of it have been talked about. What I think is the contribution of my book is that I went into, and you have to read the book to get to it, but chapter 7 is all about how difficult this is to do in companies, especially in big companies. But I think it's also true in small companies that the things that make us good at developing a single product at a time make us bad at developing a family of complementary innovations. And also make us bad at reaching outside. That the biggest killers of this are the accountants or the people. Again, think about that poor team from Sony who had to go and develop a better action camera, and they work like hell, and they do, and they probably got punished for it because their camera that they developed didn't sell. But whose fault is it? It's not that team's fault. They did what they were asked. It is the management's fault who, they were fighting the competition where GoPro was dating the customer. And so I wanted to write the book, not just as a step-by-step approach, but also as a way of helping companies change their internal roles, processes, metrics, business case, policies, et cetera, so that the teams had a chance to be successful doing it. And that's what I think people aren't talking about enough.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. When you innovate around other companies' products, how do you think about the risk that the company changes its product design? For example, iPhone case for iPhones.
Yeah, so that's a real thing, and of course, there's not just the product changing, but there is also the company incorporating the technology or the idea that you come up with into their product. But that said, there are ways to protect intellectual property, and so you can come up with that, low-cost toothbrush, and maybe the company that really wants it will pay you quite a lot of money, $500 million in the spin brush example, to acquire your technology. That's not a bad end game, for somebody who's worried about the company, changing it. I'm sure that Crest could have tried to invent a spin brush, and actually, if you look at the market, which I have. Gillette came up with, under their Oral-B line, they came up with a better version of a low-cost electric toothbrush. It's a very different internal architecture, and it actually works better and costs about $1 cheaper to make. So it's a much higher margin. And I don't know if you remember, but Procter & Gamble bought Gillette, and when they spun off their, they got hit with an anti-monopoly lawsuit from Europe and had to spin off some of their properties. They actually spun off the spin brush and kept the Oral-B electric toothbrush. And so, there's competition that, of course, that's going to happen in all these different things. But innovating around somebody else's product is often, a lot of big companies, they just don't have the time, or they have set up systems that will prevent them from doing it. And so it's a chance to establish yourself in a market that is good and solve a problem that customers have. And so you can date somebody else's customer and help them solve that problem. And that could be a very powerful way to make a very nice business. Like I said, Logitech does this and only this, and has made a very good business doing it.
Thank you. This has really been terrific, so interesting. Thank you, Professor Robertson, again, for joining us today. And I also want to thank all of our Sloan alumni and friends for joining us. To keep this conversation going over social media, please use the hashtag SloanyChat. We hope you'll be able to join our future MIT Sloan Alumni Online events made possible in part by the Sloan Annual Fund. As today's event comes to a close, please take a moment to complete the brief survey that will automatically pop up on your screen. Thank you again for joining MIT Sloan Alumni Online, and thank you again, Professor Robertson.
Thank you.